Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. We're standing by waiting for a press conference at the Rose Garden to start with President Trump. That press conference scheduled to start any minute now, but I want to turn first to some breaking headlines we're getting out of Moderna. A new study has shown that Moderna's vaccine candidate that they have been working on produce antibodies in all 45 of the patients tested. This is promising news. The production of these antibodies doesn't prove that the vaccine is effective, but it is certainly a big step forward. The final stage of their vaccine trial is now scheduled to start July 27th. This data coming out in the New England Journal of Medicine. We're going to continue to follow this story, but now it appears Moderna in the lead with its vaccine candidate producing antibodies in all 45 of the patients tested, so good news there. Meantime, as I mentioned, we are standing by for President Trump. This press conference scheduled to start any moment now, and we're told that the South China Sea and ongoing relations with China will be the focus, along with potentially rising cases of COVID-19 across the country. Meantime, taking a look at how this impacted the markets today, volatility, again, the word of the day. I want to bring in our Bloomberg Markets reporter, Abigail Doolittle, who's been following all of this. Abigail, what were the highlights to you?
Well, volatility is certainly the word of the day, and really the word of the last month, Emily, because we've had lots of choppy action. The S&P 500 yesterday unable to take out its high after the February-March crash. So that resistance kicking in, that choppiness, uncertainty on the part of investors. That news from Moderna could be a game changer tomorrow, or at least a constructive feather in the hat for the bulls. But today, at the end of the day, we had stocks higher, but that was not the way we started. There's lots of uncertainty, investors working through, just trying to figure out what's going on here. A piece of it, Emily, over the last month or so, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet shrinking a little bit. So that's probably the backdrop of uncertainty. Today, we did not have any virus news that was worse than before. So at the end of the day, again, the bulls did ring out. And that's also true for the FANG index, which was not true all day. At one point, that index down greater than 2%. Of course, that's been a bit of a rocket ride this year. So some investors taking chips off the table, especially true for Amazon, down sharply earlier, down more than 4%. At the end of the day, down just 0.6%. And then, of course, another big story on the day, Emily, not really a bullish case, though. So it's pretty interesting. The banks, we had some of the big banks report today. JP Morgan put up a big quarter. They beat estimates. They also said that their trading did extremely well, but they did set $10.5 billion aside for future loan losses. That was the big story for Citigroup. That news weighing more so on Citigroup. And Wells Fargo, of course, the worst of the bunch. They actually posted their first quarterly loss since 2008. They also reduced the dividend by 10 cents to 10 cents from 51 cents. And they set aside $9.5 billion in loan reserve losses. And the reason that's important, Emily, that, of course, is a look ahead to the fact that these issues, the uncertainty around the pandemic is not over. They are setting aside lots and lots of money, billions of dollars, for the possibility that loans will not be paid back.
So definitely a bit of a rough start for bank earnings. And I know that Jamie Dimon talked about just a much murkier economic picture ahead as we continue to see cases resurge across the country. Moderna shares spiking after hour on that news that they're seeing some early success of the vaccine candidate that they're working on. What about other earnings coming up that you're looking out for? What are we expecting there?
Great color from JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon, because he really is a voice of reason, and he has been appropriately cautious around all of this. And I think that they also talked about the fact that the unemployment rate is likely to be in the double digits until the first half of next year. So important to pay attention to that. As far as other earnings that are coming up, we do have some of the other big banks. Goldman Sachs tomorrow. A similar story there will be to see whether or not they can put up the big trading revenues. Morgan Stanley and Bank of America on Thursday. Bank of America hit very hard this year, down about 31%. And of course, watching there will be to see the size of the loan loss provisioning as well, given their focus on the consumer. On Thursday, Emily, though, we also have Netflix. We'll be talking about this perhaps more tomorrow. But the big deal there is going to be whether or not they can hit the whispered number of subscribers added for the second quarter, which is 10 million. Guidance is 6 million, but the whispered number is 10. Some even looking for 12. And you can see over the last 2 days, Netflix down almost more than 4%. So some jitters ahead of that earnings report. But of course, we'll probably be talking more about that tomorrow, Emily.
Absolutely. Okay, Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much for that update. I do want to recap these headlines coming out of Moderna, that Moderna's vaccine candidate that they have been testing produced antibodies in all 45 of the patients tested. Some of these patients did have side effects, but the side effects were not severe enough to prevent moving forward with this particular vaccine candidate. A few more details here. You've got the vast majority of the patients in this particular study, 18 to 55 years old. They're still working on results focused on patients who are older than that. But this is a significant development. Again, these antibodies don't prove that the vaccine will be effective, but it is a huge, very important early step in testing, and they're going to move into the final stage of the trial of their vaccine candidate starting July 27th. Going back now to that press conference, we are waiting to start at the Rose Garden any moment now. We're expecting President Trump to be there. I want to bring in our Bloomberg government reporter, Emily Wilkins, who has been following this. Emily, we're hearing that the focus will be China. What are you hearing?
Well, we're waiting to see what this could be. I mean, definitely it could be China. We've heard news about Hong Kong and China today. I mean, that's something that Washington has really been focused on lately. You've seen a lot of bills coming from Congress trying to put limits on China, on Chinese officials. You've seen Trump sort of become more bullish on that as well, and you've seen China respond. So definitely, I would not be surprised at all if that is something that's brought up during the news conference today.
Meantime, obviously, we're talking about, the continued rise in cases. You have new records for deaths being set in Florida, Oklahoma, and other states across the country. In an interview with CBS that's slated to air later today, I know the president says it's a terrible decision to not reopen schools, but we're seeing more and more school districts, including my own, going to online only starting in the fall because of this surge in cases. What could we hear from the president today about the outbreak?
The president has been very outspoken on this point. He's had Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. She was talking this weekend on several TV shows about the need to have schools open and have kids go back to school. But it is interesting, though, whether or not schools open, that's not really a national issue. They could potentially do something with funding in that regard. But schools have always been a very local and a very state issue. And I think you almost saw that hit home recently with the administration today deciding to withdraw their plan to send international college students home if their colleges and universities don't reopen. That was something that led to a lot of outcry. There was a lawsuit from Harvard. And today the Trump administration just took a step back and said, you know what? We're not going to do that, and leaving colleges and universities to their own decisions.
Meantime, we're getting some more details about what President Trump is expected to do any moment now, as this press conference is about to get underway. He could potentially sign the China sanctions bill. Obviously, we know that tensions have been rising with China. The Trump administration has been taking a harsher line on China, specifically just in the last 24 hours about the South China Sea, which China has historically laid claim to, natural resources across the vast majority of that waterway. What would the significance be if President Trump indeed signs the China sanctions bill today?
There have been a bunch of bills that President Trump has signed that levy sanction on China and on tariffs. I mean, and then you even saw Secretary of State Mike Pompeo come out and sort of diminish President Xi Jinping. So there has sort of been a lot of little steps here that have been taken, and we've seen them slowly rise over time, mostly with the coronavirus. And so I'm sure the action, if we do see action today, it probably won't be the last action that we'll see for a while. And we've also seen Beijing go ahead and respond to a lot of Washington's attempts. There's been sort of this tit for tat between the two countries.
So, there are some other interesting developments that have been happening. The administration asking hospitals to bypass the CDC in putting data on cases and deaths into a central Washington database. You've got hospitals who are suspect and sort of wary of this decision. This back and forth between the administration and Dr. Fauci. Talk to us where we are right now.
Right now, it is a sort of interesting balance where the CDC has put out guidance and then has been criticized by the Trump administration for the guidance. I mean, we were just talking about schools. A very similar thing happened. CDC put out guidance for schools. Trump administration said this is too serious. We need something else. And so there has almost been a little bit of a disconnect between what you're hearing from the White House and then what you're hearing from the CDC, when those two entities really are usually a little bit more in step with each other. I mean, we are seeing issues with hospitals right now, I think particularly in California and in other states where we're seeing a spike in coronavirus cases. And so I think there's still, even though we've now had coronavirus in the U.S. for several months now, there still is this struggle to try and figure out what the best way to move forward is and what the best processes are to keep everyone safe.
All right, Emily Wilkins, our Bloomberg government congressional reporter, thank you so much for that update. We are standing by for President Trump to take the podium any moment now. While we wait, I want to add some more context to the situation, the ongoing situation between the U.S. and China as tensions continue to ratchet up. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Sherry on, who's been following all of this. Sherry, we've seen tensions ratchet up just in the last 24 hours about the administration's position on the South China Sea. You had Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying that China is doing nothing short of bullying other states, in this area, which is certainly a step up in the rhetoric. The big question, though, is what is the Trump administration going to do about it, or how will the Trump administration act on this new stance? Give us some context here about how this plays into the overall U.S.-China dynamic.
So much has happened, even just in the last 24 hours, Emily, that's really easy to lose track. Let's not forget the sanctions imposed by China on Lockheed Martin as well because of their potential $620 million deal to supply missile parts to Taiwan. So geopolitics now playing a big part as well. And you mentioned the South China Sea. Now, this is a 1.4 million square mile waterway between China and Indonesia. And this has really become a central key issue and a point where you see once again the Trump administration really doing away with a past U.S. traditional foreign policy. In the past, the U.S. had only called for protecting the freedom of navigation in the waterway, but really not taken a specific position when it comes to these territorial claims. Well, all of that changed with, as you say, Secretary Pompeo now saying that they're making it clear that Beijing's claims to offshore resources across most of the South China Sea are completely unlawful. Of course, we had seen back in 2016 a United Nations tribunal siding with the Philippines in its argument that China's claims of historic rights to this waterway don't comply with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. But it's not just an argument between China and the Philippines. It's also an argument with Vietnam, Brunei, Malaysia, also Taiwan that claim parts of that maritime area.
Meantime, Sherry, we're hearing now that the president is expected to sign the China sanctions bill. He's facing a deadline to sign that by midnight tonight. So we're expecting him to sign this at the press conference happening any moment now. Of course, this plays into the relationship between the U.S. and Hong Kong, the new national security law that Beijing has imposed on Hong Kong. That's, of course, been very controversial and only served to ratchet up tensions between the United States and China. What would the significance of this be?
We have seen President Trump now take more direct action against China's human rights issues. We have, of course, seen him already sign the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act just last month. Now, that would also impose sanctions on Chinese officials responsible for human rights abuses against Muslim minority Uyghurs. Now, what was interesting with those sanctions, though, that when they were applied to Chinese officials over human rights issue, the U.S. administration didn't use specifically that sanctions bill that was passed almost unanimously by Congress, but they made use of the 2016 Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. Now, this gives the U.S. broad authority to impose human rights sanctions on foreign officials. So we had those sanctions on 4 Chinese officials. And yesterday, we had China imposing sanctions on U.S. officials, including Senators Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. Now, the big question now is what happens if we get sanctions now over Hong Kong. And this is potentially what we could hear from President Trump, the signing of that Hong Kong Autonomy Act. Now, this could be a bit more severe than the Uyghurs bill, because this would not only affect individuals, but also would penalize banks doing business with Chinese officials who implement this new national security law on Hong Kong. What does that mean? Well, we'll have to see the details, but it could perhaps even undermine Hong Kong's status as a financial hub if businesses get caught in the middle of this dispute.
We're still waiting for President Trump to take the podium here, Sherry, so appreciate all of this context. Huawei is another big issue that's been playing into this. And again, just in the last day, we've seen the UK now banning Huawei from its networks. This is something that the United States has been trying to convince the UK to do. A huge U-turn for Prime Minister Boris Johnson. What is the latest on this, and how does this factor in?
Really interesting that this Huawei ban comes at this particular time, because we have been speaking about the issue over Hong Kong, and we have seen relations souring between China and the UK, with the UK accusing Beijing on going back on their promise in that 1984 treaty to preserve Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. And they have, of course, already said that about 40% of Hong Kong citizens could actually get a path to citizenship. Now, with those relations souring, we are hearing from the UK that they have banned Huawei from their 5G networks. Now, this is a huge U-turn, as you said, for Boris Johnson, because back in January, he had actually given the green light for that to proceed and Huawei to do business within the UK. But now that seems to have changed. And now all equipment that's already installed in the UK will need to be removed from 5G infrastructure by 2027. When it comes to gear for their fixed full fiber broadband networks, they will consult with the industry, but that they should have a decision within 2 years. And of course, this coming at a time when the UK really had to reassess their business with Huawei, because it's also when the US is applying more and more pressure against Huawei. In May, the US banned Huawei from sourcing microchips with American technology. And then you had the UK Cybersecurity Center concluding that without that American technology being used for Huawei gear, Huawei could actually end up using insecure technology. So you are now seeing the pressure from the Trump administration really directly playing into perhaps this effort, international effort to pressure Huawei. Secretary Pompeo coming out with this tweet saying today's decision by the UK to ban Huawei from its 5G networks advances transatlantic security in the 5G era while protecting citizens' privacy, national security, and free world values.
Meantime, Sherry, you've got China calling this ban disappointing and wrong. They said similar things about the U.S. ban as well. And all of this sort of only ratcheting up the pressure in what's been an already tense relationship between the United States and China. In an interview with CBS that's scheduled to air later today, President Trump said he's not interested in talking to China about another trade deal. How do these actions with Huawei in particular, sort of change the playing field going forward in this, what's become, a tit for tat, but increasingly dramatic tits for tats?
We have seen President Trump really during the Phase 1 trade negotiations hold back on more severe action against China. And as you said, President Trump now saying that the Phase 2 trade deal is not a priority. He actually said the U.S.-China relationship is now severely damaged. There wasn't a lot of high hope when it came to a Phase 2 trade deal, especially with the U.S. election timeline here. But this really puts into perspective where this relationship is going. Really interesting that even within China, whether it's President Trump winning another election in another 4 years or a Democrat coming into office, Chinese officials on the ground don't think that the relationship between the U.S. and China will improve that much. They now expect relations to deteriorate. We have seen sort of a more consensus within Washington as well when it comes to measures against China. We have seen it both in in the Uyghurs Human Rights Act, not to mention on the Hong Kong Autonomy Act, both passed almost unanimously through both chambers of commerce. Now, with the Huawei Act, we could also see with the Huawei measures by the UK, also the pressure by the US, we could see more pressure on other countries like Canada that has to make a decision on whether or not to include Huawei on their 5G networks. Also pressure mounting on Germany to make a decision as well.
Sherry, what does this all mean for Hong Kong's ability to continue to operate as a major international financial hub? Because all of this back and forth is having major implications on the actual way, or could have major implications on the actual way that business has been done across the U.S. Hong Kong, U.S. China border. What will this actually mean in practice?
When it comes to business between the U.S. and Hong Kong, we have seen this special status established for Hong Kong, right? That has led to each year billions of dollars worth of goods and services to be traded between Hong Kong and the U.S. Now, with this national security law going into effect in Hong Kong, the U.S. has already taken action not only with potentially this Hong Kong Autonomy Act, but they have already made it harder to export sensitive American technology to Hong Kong, and that has really suspended regulations allowing special treatment to the territory. And we have heard the Trump administration that they will take further action to eliminate Hong Kong's special status. So this new national security law implemented by Beijing really casting a shadow on the future of Hong Kong as a financial hub. We have really seen even other countries in the region try to step up their efforts to lure in more financial companies. We have seen the first debate happening in Japan by the ruling Japanese Democratic Party, trying to make Japan more competitive and more appealing for financial companies as well. This security law, of course, is very broad. It can be interpreted very vaguely. It really depends a lot on how Beijing interprets the law. Right now, we know that it goes around across 66 articles, 18 pages. It allows for potential life sentences on crimes such as subversion or collusion with foreign powers. So this also applies not only to Hong Kong residents, but people anywhere around the world, which makes not only businesses, but individuals in Hong Kong and around the world potentially criticizing Beijing or the Communist Party very, very nervous.
All right, Sherry, stand by. We did get the 2-minute warning from the White House that the president would be about to take the podium, but that was now several minutes ago, and no sign of him yet. Again, we are hearing that he is expected to sign the China sanctions bill at this press conference. Sherry has very eloquently there been talking about the importance of this, of course, only ratcheting up the tensions in an already tense relationship between the United States and China. In the last 24 hours, we've seen the United States, specifically Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, take a harder line on China's position when it comes to the South China Sea, a large waterway which China has laid claim to the majority of for many, many years. The U.S. has always disputed China's claim on that territory, but now taking a harder line, saying that China is doing nothing short of bullying other countries in this area. That includes the Philippines, that includes Vietnam. Meantime, of course, you've got rising cases of COVID-19 across the country. You've got new records being set for deaths in Florida, in Utah, in Oklahoma. We did get some headlines out of an interview that the president did with CBS that's scheduled to air later today, where the president calls the decision to not reopen schools, which is increasingly happening across the country, a terrible decision. We know that school districts in Los Angeles, San Diego, Atlanta, my own school district last night, now voting unanimously to do online-only schooling, which of course has huge implications for parents and for students and for workers who can't go back to work full-time if their companies are accepting workers back to work full-time, if their kids are at home in school. So several knock-on effects there. Meantime, also today, the administration has backtracked, largely walked back a plan that would have stripped international students of their visas if their classes were online only, meaning that if these students couldn't go to school and had to take their classes online, they could potentially have to leave the country. Harvard University and MIT sued the administration. That has now reached a resolution, according to a judge, and those students will be able to stay in the country if their classes are online only. We're continuing to stand by, awaiting the president. We're also getting some new numbers out of Texas right now. Cases of COVID-19 in Texas setting another daily record, 10,745 cases in Texas in a single day. And on that note, we've got new news coming out of Moderna, a huge progress in the testing of their vaccine candidate. Moderna shares now up after hours, almost 20%. This after we learned that Moderna's vaccine candidate produced antibodies in all 45 of the patients tested. Again, that doesn't mean the vaccine will work for sure, but it's a huge, important step. I want to get back to Emily Wilkins, our Bloomberg congressional reporter, who's been standing by waiting for the president, just like we are. Emily, we got the 2-minute warning, but that feels like it was almost 15 minutes ago, not particularly unusual when it comes to a press conference with President Trump. These can be fairly unpredictable, but he hasn't been holding as many of these. What are you hearing about the delay and what we might hear from the president today?
To be totally honest, as a reporter who covers politics in Washington, I am very much used to waiting for people to come to the mic and start speaking in it. It's something that happens with Trump. It's something that happens with a lot of other politicians here. So I'm sure he'll be there soon. But yes, definitely expecting news today about potentially China. We're expecting the president, I think, to address coronavirus in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, it's the elephant in the room at this point. And what else he says, it's a Trump press conference. They sometimes tend to be very wide and varied in what topics are discussed.
Meantime, we're also getting some headlines about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who has been hospitalized with a possible infection. She underwent a procedure earlier today at Johns Hopkins. She's going to be staying in the hospital for a few days. Of course, we know that she has had some problems with her health, but has been valiantly continuing to serve in her position as justice. Talk to us about what's at stake at this moment in time as you have the president, Emily, pushing for states across the country to reopen and certain states seeing huge outbreaks, and certain state leaders like Governor Gavin Newsom, the governor of my state, who's saying not so fast.
Sure. Well, just to touch very quick on the news about Justice Ginsburg, it was something I think that's good context to remember, that if the worst should happen, certainly, and if something was to happen to any justice, Senator Mitch McConnell, the majority leader of the Senate, has pledged to fill that spot as quickly as he can. So I think that's why a lot of news is really paid, even if a justice, is sort of going in for something that is a little routine or perhaps a little more minor. There's a lot of eyeballs on that, because to fill a spot at the Supreme Court several months out for the election would be tremendous news. It would have everyone's attention. But you're right. Yes, coronavirus. Things in the U.S. they haven't been looking good. We've seen outbreaks in states, including Florida. Remember, Florida is a state where the Republicans moved their presidential convention after deciding to leave North Carolina. And now we're seeing an outbreak in that state as well.
Talk to us about the schools angle here, because it feels like it's just hitting, just in the last 24 hours, with all of these schools deciding that, in the fall, things are going to be online only for an indefinite period of time. It's almost as if people are starting to realize this isn't going to be over anytime soon. And it's certainly something that the president has to reckon with. You've got Republicans still planning to hold their national convention in a matter of weeks in Florida, where cases are now through the roof. And, how does that impact the president's messaging going forward?
Well, the president has been very sort of consistent throughout the last several months that he wants the economy to reopen. He wants kids to go back to school. He wants things to sort of return to
Emily, hang
normalness.
on. Emily, hang on. The president is walking up to the podium. Let's take a listen in.
Please. Hope it's not too hot, but it's pretty warm. Thank you. So, We've had a big day in the stock market. Things are coming back, and they're coming back very rapidly, a lot sooner than people thought. People are feeling good about our country. People are feeling good about therapeutics and possible vaccines. But we're going to go over quite a bit, and maybe at the end we'll take some questions if we have time. It's not too hot. Today I signed legislation and an executive order to hold China accountable for its oppressive actions against the people of Hong Kong. The Hong Kong Autonomy Act, which I signed this afternoon, passed unanimously through Congress. This law gives my administration powerful new tools to hold responsible the individuals and the entities involved in extinguishing Hong Kong's freedom. We've all watched what happened. Not a good situation. Their freedom's been taken away, their rights have been taken away, and with it goes Hong Kong, in my opinion, because it will no longer be able to compete with free markets. A lot of people will be leaving Hong Kong, I suspect. And we're going to do a lot more business because of it, because we just lost one competitor. It's the way it is. We lost a very, very serious competitor that we incentivized to take a lot of business and do well. And we gave them a lot of business by doing what we did. We gave them things that nobody else had the right to do. And that gave them a big edge over other markets. And because of that edge, they've done really historic business, tremendous business, far bigger than anybody would have thought years ago when we did this gift. It was really a gift to freedom. Today, I also signed an executive order ending U.S. preferential treatment for Hong Kong. Hong Kong will now be treated the same as mainland China. No special privileges, no special economic treatment, and no export of sensitive technologies. In addition to that, as you know, we're placing massive tariffs and have placed very large tariffs on China. First time that's ever happened to China. Billions of dollars have been paid to the United States, of which I've given quite a bit to the farmers and ranchers of our country because they were targeted. And that's been going on for 3 years. It's the first time anybody's ever done anything like that. And prior to the plague pouring in from China, they were having the worst year, as you know, in 67 years. And I don't want them to have a bad year. I want them to have a good year. But they were taking advantage of the United States for many, many years. And that's stopping. But then the virus came in, and the world is a different place. But we're now getting back. And one of the reasons the market's doing so, it's almost at the point that it was at prior to the plague. Almost. We're getting very close. It's a great thing. It's an amazing thing what our people have done and what they've endured. No administration has been tougher on China than this administration. We imposed historic tariffs. We stood up to China's intellectual property theft at a level that nobody's ever come close. We confronted untrustworthy Chinese technology and telecom providers. We convinced many countries, and I did this myself for the most part, not to use Huawei, because we think it's an unsafe security risk. It's a big security risk. I talked many countries out of using it. If they want to do business with us, they can't use it. Just today, I believe that UK announced that they're not going to be using it. And that was up in the air for a long time, but they've decided. And you look at Italy, you look at many other countries. We withdrew from the Chinese-dominated WHO, and we fully rebuilt the United States military. The WHO, World Health Organization, we were paying close to $500 million a year. China was paying $39 million a year. And China had too much say. They worked it very hard, which is a bad thing done by our past administrations. But we were tough, and we were saying, I was asking, I said, why are we paying so much more than China? China has 1.4 billion people. We have 325, probably 325 million approximately. Nobody can give the exact count. We're trying to get an exact count, but you have, over the years, many illegals who have come into the country, so it depends on how you want to count it. but you could say 325 to 350 million people as opposed to 1.4 billion people. And the world trade is terrible. That deal is terrible. The world health is a terrible deal. We've been very tough on the World Trade Organization, and we've been, I guess, as tough as you can get on world health. We withdrew our money. We told them we're getting out. Doesn't mean that someday we won't go back in. Maybe we will when it's correctly run, but they made a lot of bad predictions, and they said a lot of bad things about what to do and how to do it, and they turned out to be wrong. And they were really a puppet of China. And make no mistake, we hold China fully responsible for concealing the virus and unleashing it upon the world. They could have stopped it. They should have stopped it. Would have been very easy to do at the source when it happened. In contrast, Joe Biden's entire career has been a gift to the Chinese Communist Party and to the calamity of errors that they've made. They made so many errors, and it's been devastating for the American worker. China has taken out hundreds of billions of dollars a year from our country, and we rebuilt China. I give them all the credit in the world. I don't give the credit for the people that used to stand here, because they allowed this to happen, where hundreds of billions of dollars were taken out of the United States Treasury in order to rebuild China. There's no company and no country in the world has ever ripped off the United States like the incredible job that they did on this country and the people that ran it. Possibly it's one of the reasons, certainly it's one of the very big reasons, trade and things related to trade, that I got elected in the first place. I've been talking about it for a long time, along with many other subjects, frankly. Joe Biden supported China's entry into the World Trade Organization, one of the greatest geopolitical and economic disasters in world history. If you look at China and you look at the moment they joined the World Trade, they were flatlining for years and years and years and decades. And then all of a sudden they joined the World Trade Organization, and they went like a rocket ship. They were given all sorts of advantages. They were considered a developing country. As a developing country, they got tremendous advantages over the United States and other countries. And they took advantage of those advantages and then some. Biden personally led the effort to give China permanent most favored nation status, which is a tremendous advantage for a country to have. Few countries have it. But the United States doesn't have it. Never did. Probably never even asked for it, because they didn't know what they were doing. As Vice President, Biden was a leading advocate of the Paris Climate Accord, which was unbelievably expensive to our country, would have crushed American manufacturers while allowing China to pollute the atmosphere with impunity. Yet one more gift from Biden to the Chinese Communist Party. They took all of the advantage away from us. They took everything away. They don't have oil. We would have had to close up tremendous amounts of our energy to qualify eventually, not too far into the future. We would have had to do things that would have been unbelievably destructive to our country, including the possible closing of 25% of our businesses. Think of that. And it was going to cost us hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for the privilege of being involved in the Paris Climate Accord. And you just have to look at what took place this year in Paris and France, where money was being sent to countries all over the world, and the people of France didn't want to take it, and they didn't, and they did a lot of rioting. They had their taxes raised. We would have had to raise our taxes, and it was a disaster. I've been given a lot of credit for what I did there. It took a certain amount of courage, I guess, because it sounds so nice, the Paris Climate Accord, but it wasn't good for us at all. America lost nearly 10,000 factories while Joe Biden was vice president. Think of that, 10,000 factories. He wrote something today, and he made a statement today that I wrote down, pretty accurate. So Biden was here for 47 years, 8 years, the last 8 years, not long ago, as vice president. He said 1 in 5 miles of our highways are still in poor condition. Well, we're doing a good job on highways, but why didn't he fix them 3 years ago? Why didn't he fix them? Tens of thousands of bridges are in disrepair and on the verge of collapse. Well, it's probably not a right number, but we have bridges that should have been fixed. Why didn't he fix them? He was there for 8 years with President Obama. Why didn't they fix them? Tens of thousands of bridges. This is what he wrote. High-speed broadband. We want high-speed broadband. Well, why didn't he get it? 3 years ago is not a long time. And he didn't do any of the things, but now he says he's going to be president. And as president, he's going to do all the things that he didn't do. He never did anything except make very bad decisions, especially on foreign policy. So Joe Biden and President Obama freely allowed China to pillage our factories, plunder our communities, and steal our most precious secrets. And I've stopped it largely, but I've stopped it. And it wasn't easy, because you talk about a certain power of the telephone and the calls, where they would call and say, no, we don't want to do that. And other countries would call on behalf of China, but I did it. I did what has to be done. And you just take a look at what's gone on and take a look at at the numbers where they devalued their currency in order to pay the tariffs. Now the Democrat Party is calling for defunding of our military. Think of that, defunding. They want to defund our military when China is building a massive military. They're building a massive military, and Biden wants to defund our military. And the world needs American strength right now more than ever, and we've got it. We've got now, soon, as all this equipment comes in, all made in the USA, we've got the newest, most incredible weapons anywhere in the world. We have the best tanks, the best ships, the best missiles, rockets. We have the best of everything. We have the best fighter jets, the F-35, the F-18. All of these assets are being built. Tankers, incredible tankers, bombers. Hope we don't have to use them. But we have the most incredible military. When I came in, the military was totally depleted. It was at a level that was just absolutely incredible. You know the statements. I made the statements before. I told you what generals told me about our military. And I'll make them again. If somebody needs them, we'll give them to you. Very well documented. As vice president, Biden opposed tariffs, and he was standing up for China. He didn't want to do anything to disrupt the relationship with China, even though China was taking us to the cleaners. He opposed my very strict travel ban on Chinese nationals to stop the spread of the China virus. He was totally against it. Xenophobic, he called me. Xenophobic. A month later, he admitted I was right. We would have had thousands of people additionally die if we let people come in from heavily infected China. But we stopped it. We did a travel ban in January. Nancy Pelosi was dancing in the streets of Chinatown in San Francisco a month later, and even later than that. And others, too. They all thought what I did was a terrible mistake. We would have lost, in fact, Dr. Fauci said he would have lost thousands of additional people if President Trump had to do that. And I was a crowd of one, because even experts didn't want to do it. They thought it was a mistake. And then I did Europe when I started seeing what was going on in Italy and Spain and France and other countries in Europe. I did a ban on people coming in from Europe. That would have been disastrous for our country also. And we saved tens of thousands of lives, but we actually saved millions of lives by closing up. We saved millions, potentially millions of lives. Could be a number that we're actually working on, but it could be 2 to 3 million lives. So we're at 135,000, which is terrible. One is too much. But we would have had millions of people dead from this curse that came at us. But we did what we had to do, and now we'll put out the flames as it happens. We have to get the schools open. We have to get everything open. A lot of people don't want to do that for political reasons, not for other reasons. But if we had listened to Joe Biden, hundreds of thousands of additional lives would have been lost. And if you look at the job he did on swine flu, I looked at a poll. They have polls on everything nowadays. And they got very bad marks on the job they did on the swine flu. H1N1. He calls it N1H1. H1N1. Got very poor marks from Gallup on the job they did on swine flu. And they stopped very early on testing. They totally stopped it. They just said stop. And frankly, if we didn't test, you wouldn't have all the headlines because we're showing cases. And we have just about the lowest mortality rate. But if we did, think of this, if we didn't do testing, instead of testing over 40 million people, if we did half the testing, we'd have half the cases. If we did another, you cut that in half, we'd have yet again half of that. But the headlines are always testing. Now, the testing is a good thing, but at the same time, it's fodder for the fake news to report cases. So we're doing 40 million plus, going to be very close to 45 million people. And when I turn on the news, I see cases, cases, cases. They don't talk about deaths being cut down to a level that actually tenfold they use. I got that from one of the very respected media outlets. Tenfold, cut tenfold deaths, but they don't talk about that. They talk about cases, and the cases are created because of the fact that we do tremendous testing. We have the best testing in the world. We now make ventilators for the world. We had very few ventilators. There wasn't one person in any hospital anywhere in this country that needed a ventilator that didn't get it. And that was because we mobilized to a level, using the Purchasing Act in some cases, we mobilized to a level that nobody thought possible. Nothing's happened like that since World War II. Our task force has done a great job. Mike Pence works so hard, it gets so little credit. Sad to see that, actually. But he works so hard, gets so little credit. The governors would tell us, we'd be on the phone with 50 different governors. They'd all tell us what a great job. And then they'll go to the media and say, well, they didn't do such a good job. Well, we did a great job. We made a lot of governors look fantastic. We did in New York. What we did in New York was one of the most incredible things. 2,800 bed in Javits Center, but the governor used very few of them, unfortunately. Then we moved in our great hospital ship, one of our two great. We moved one also to Los Angeles. And we could have used that for our senior citizens. We could have used it for other people. They could have used it instead of sending our seniors back into nursing homes that were infected, where you lost thousands of people. Thousands of people in New York died because of poor management by the governor. And it's a very sad thing to see, and very sad to watch, and very sad to look at those statistics. But we have an incredible Javits Center that we built with thousands of beds. I think it was 2,800, all ready to go. And they could have sent people there, or they could have sent senior citizens there instead of sending them into the nursing homes. And after all of that work and getting it done, the Army Corps of Engineers, I mean, the job they did was incredible. They built it in a matter of days. When it was all completed, FEMA, everybody was there, doctors. We ended up getting doctors. They said, we can't man it. They said, so we'll man it and woman it. And that's what we did. We brought in doctors, nurses, everything. We're all set. We said, where are the people? They didn't send the people. Very few people came in. They could have sent them into the Javits Center. They could have sent them to the hospital ship, which was virtually unused, but we were there. By contrast, my administration acted very early to ban travel from China, from Europe, saving all of these lives. Incredible. And I want everyone to know, I want every citizen to know that we're using the full power of the federal government to fight the China virus and to keep our people safe. Through Operation Warp Speed, we will deliver a vaccine in record-breaking time. We're doing very well on the vaccines. We have many, many different vaccines being studied right now, many of which are looking really good. And we're ready to distribute the vaccine when we get it. We're all set, taking a risk, an economic risk of preparing for delivery because we feel very certain it's going to be there. But logistically, we have our military ready to go. We have generals that's all they do is distribute things, and they're going to be distributing hopefully a vaccine or a therapeutic, and it's coming out really well. And I think you're going to have some good news very, very quickly having to do with the vaccines. We're also working with many other countries on the vaccine. Many countries are working with us. We're unleashing our nation's scientific genius to kill the virus. Joe Biden didn't just side with China on the virus. He did. He called me, again, xenophobic. That's what he said. You all heard it many times. He described the rise of China as, quote, a very positive development. Not a positive development. Not for us, it's not. He said that the idea that China is our competition is really bizarre. He's really bizarre. He said China's not a problem. No. Nobody's ripped us off more than China over the last 25, 30 years. Nobody close. And he says China's not a problem. Now he takes it all back now. Now he wants to be Mr. Tough Guy. But for years, 47 years, he never came out against China, never said anything bad, just the opposite. His son walked out with $1.5 billion of money to invest where he'll make hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars a year. Walked out with $1.5 billion. I asked one of the biggest people on Wall Street, maybe the biggest, is that possible? He said no. He's never seen it. They don't do that. But Hunter, where's Hunter? Where is Hunter, by the way? Hunter Biden walked out with $1.5 billion. In Ukraine, he got $83,000 a month and I guess an upfront payment of $3 million. So he went from not having a job to getting $83,000 a month with a lot of money paid up front to work for Burisma. And you all know about Burisma. But nothing happens. Nobody cares. And he was unemployed, as you know. He was unfortunately forced to leave the military. He was forced to leave. Didn't have a job, and all of a sudden he's making a fortune. But nobody talks about that. Indeed, Biden expressed more fawning praise about China on an ordinary day than about America. On the 4th of July, the last Independence Day, Biden attacked the United States and said we had, quote, never lived up to the ideals of our fathers, our forefathers, or our founding fathers, those founding ideals. And yet he enthusiastically stated that China is a great nation and we should hope for its continued expansion. Well, we all wish well to China, but what China's unleashed on the world, it's hard to even fathom. I see people now, friends of mine, they walk up, they want to say hello, and they have to keep their distance, and they're all covered up like you're all covered up with face masks. It's a different world, but we're coming out on top. Biden sides with China over America time and time again. And he said on the 4th of July, American history is no fairy tale, and yet blindly celebrates China, saying few nations in history have come so far, so fast. He's so proud of them. He's so proud of them. Now Joe Biden is pushing a platform that would demolish the U.S. economy, totally demolish it. So we built the greatest economy in the history of our country, greatest in the history of the world. That was a few months ago. Best unemployment numbers ever. Best for African American, Asian American, Hispanic American. Best for women, best for everybody. Best for young people that didn't have a high school diploma, didn't have a college diploma. They had a diploma. They were really in good shape. We built the greatest ever. Stock market highest ever in history. We had 143 days of all-time stock market highs in just less than 3.5 years. And we had to close it down because we did the right thing by doing that. As I said, we saved millions of lives. But China was saying, this is incredible what's going on. China was for the first time respecting the United States. And now they want to do something that's much different, Joe Biden. So I've watched this, and I've watched it with great interest. We're building our economy again. I guess the stock market went up almost 500 points today or something thereabouts. You'll check, but it was up a lot when I left. And our economy is coming back. We're almost at a level where, even though it's long before the very important, maybe the most important ever election of November 3rd, we're long before that, but we're close to record stock markets again, and NASDAQ hit an all-time high for the 16th time. Think of that, for the 16th time over the last month or so, for the 16th time. So one of our markets already hit an all-time high. Today, Joe Biden gave a speech in which he said that the core of his economic agenda is a hard left crusade against American energy. He wants to kill American energy. He wants to re-enter the unfair, one-sided Paris Climate Accord, which will destroy us, at the expense of many other nations who benefit. It was actually drawn, in my opinion, to take advantage of the United States, just like so many other deals are done to take advantage of the fools running the United States. But this would do nothing for the environment, but would cripple American industry while greatly helping China. He wants to impose massive energy taxes and job-crushing mandates to eliminate carbon from the United States economy. Let him define the word carbon, because he won't be able to. Obliterating American oil, clean coal, natural gas, and the natural energy resources that supply countless American jobs. Joe Biden put AOC, a young woman, not talented in many ways, in charge of his energy plan and the environment, essentially. Her and Bernie Sanders, who ran a lot of times for president, never made it. Good base, but that's about it. In other words, he wants to impose the Green New Deal on our country. When I first saw the Green New Deal, I thought it was a joke. I said, this will never go anywhere. Now they're trying to impose it. This will destroy our country and make us non-competitive with other countries. Don't forget, we're in competition with China and with many other countries throughout the world. We're in tremendous economic competition, including Europe, which has never treated us well. The European Union was formed in order to take advantage of the United States. They formed, and they take advantage of the United States. And I know that. They know I know that. But other presidents had no idea. Last week, Joe Biden released his unity platform developed with socialist Bernie Sanders, describing what he would do if elected president. The Biden-Sanders agenda is the most extreme platform of any major party nominee, by far, in American history. I think it's worse than actually Bernie's platform. It's gone so far right. And he's doing that because he's begging for that vote. But one of the things I just asked my people to do is just draw up for me, just quickly, some of the things that we've been hearing about over the last couple of weeks. And these are actual key elements of the Biden-Sanders unity platform. Abolish immigration detention. No more detention. You come in here illegally, no more detention. Stop all deportations. So if we get a MS-13 gang member, which we've taken out of our country by the thousands, brought them back to Honduras, Guatemala, can't do that anymore. El Salvador, can't do that anymore. Stop all deportations. In other words, we'll take all of these people, many of whom are in prison for rape, murder,